Cassie.
Blog Talk USA. Are you tired of waiting for change?
1012, and it gives me 1,250 feet. Exit.
Announced the arrival of their flight from Los Angeles and Chicago.
Explosion.
Welcome, everybody, to the TNZ Talk Show. I am Tony Tripiano, the TNZ. It is Monday, the 21st day of March, and really the beginning of spring, depending where you're at. And I think where Z's at, they're expecting snow. Where I'm at, it's only going to get colder. But good morning, Z. Hope you had a nice weekend.
I did. We actually did get snow. We got about 2 inches, which is slightly less than the foot that they were expecting.
They had forecasted a foot, and you got 2 inches.
Yep.
Well, welcome to meteorology. I mean, it may be the only profession in the world where you actually are wrong 80% of the time and get paid handsomely for it.
Well, you know what? I found something out because they were saying it was going to be 6 to 12 inches. Then they said it was going to be 18 inches. Then they came back around and said it's only going to be a dusting. Then they said it's only going to be about 2 to 3 inches. And as it turns out, the satellites only go by every 12 hours. So they only get to look at the satellite stuff for, a period of a 12-hour span. And I didn't know that. I just figured that, they looked at the weather all the time. And so every 12 hours, this changed, which is why we got new news all the time. They went as far as closing the schools in Boston, and, we got 2 inches of snow. So,
well, I'm sure the kids appreciated it, especially since many of them will be off for what is now spring break next week because you're not allowed to have an Easter break anymore.
Right.
Which is just ridiculous. Well, the one thing I will say Donald Trump is right about, political correctness. Well, political correctness has gotten a little bit out of control. I'll give him that much. The phrase works for me. In his reality, it doesn't work for me. But the phrase works for me. Anyway, we've got a lot of stuff to get to today, including a weekend of insanity, especially as it surrounds the SCOTUS nominee, Merrick Garland. Some of the stuff that was said on the Sunday morning shows was just absolutely incredibly ridiculous, especially coming out of the mouth of Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, who, as you know, loves to talk about the Biden rule, which doesn't exist. But even the prognosticators and pundits don't seem to realize that the Biden rule doesn't exist. See, did you notice that nobody challenged him on that?
Well, what I did notice is that Trevor Noah, who does the Daily Show now, did challenge him on it. And I was watching it this morning, and I was like, oh, I should have gotten some audio from that. And then I realized that we have so much audio today that maybe I'll get it for tomorrow. But he and his staff and the other comedians on the new Daily Show did a wonderful job of explaining this, and that it's just complete BS, that there's no such thing as the Biden rule. And he actually, as an example, he showed a guy wearing a Kiss Me, I'm Irish shirt, and it says, that's not a rule, that's just a suggestion, right? It's like, you don't have to kiss that guy. And did a really good job of showing that what McConnell and the rest of the GOP who are trying to oppose this nomination are talking about when it comes to the Biden rule are referring to, something that Biden said back in 92 that was basically hypothetical, and there is no rule. In fact, most of the Senate and House rules can be found in Wikipedia, and the Biden rule showed up in Wikipedia a couple weeks ago when McConnell started making this thing, and there's a big online argument in Wikipedia as to whether or not this is valid, that it's a biased entry, that it's not a real rule. But, if you say something enough times, it becomes true. And that's what they're banking
on. Yeah, the memes that they are. Well, amongst the other things that we'll discuss this morning are also the president's trip to Cuba, and I'm watching that on MSNBC right now. He's about to lay a wreath at the Cuban memorial. Hundreds of protesters were detained yesterday, as they are every Sunday, in what has become a tradition in Cuba after church. The difference this time around, of course, is there are 1,000 members of the international media recording this, and the president will be meeting with Raul Castro a little bit later on in the day today, but we'll get to that in a little while. But see, why don't we start with the SCOTUS nominee, Merrick Garland. Judge Garland, of course, has been proven to be a pretty straight-up fellow. Guy that was originally confirmed for the seat that he currently sits, the judicial seat that he currently sits on, by a very comfortable bipartisan margin. And yet there are those within the Republican Party that are steadfast in their willingness to look like asses, including the Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell. Others are finding a little more space to talk about Judge Garland and perhaps giving him an opportunity to talk to them and perhaps hold a hearing. But man, oh man, we've got a ton of audio on this, so I'm going to let you, of course, talk about that a little bit, and then, again, we can spin the wheel of audio and land wherever we'd like.
Yeah, and actually I think a good start to this is probably just Obama talking about Merrick Garland when he made his announcement, and discussing his why he's nominating him and like that. I mean, the thing that I find really interesting, and we're going to see this as we go through some of the audio, but even Fox News had McConnell on and have been talking about this throughout the week and are basically also pointing out the hypocrisy of the Republican Party. And they keep saying this has never happened. No one's been nominated during an election year, and this doesn't happen. And, they're trying to say that Obama is a lame duck president. And the question really becomes is when exactly in the last year of a presidency does the president become a lame duck? Because really in this case, what they're saying, what the GOP is saying, is that the last year just doesn't count and he shouldn't be allowed to do anything because he's just and this is all stuff that's going to eventually bite them in the ass like it always does, because they'll be in this position and the Democrats will be in a position to say, oh, but wait a minute. Back in 2016, you said the last year doesn't count. And Justice Kennedy, who still sits on the bench and has for a couple decades, was actually nominated and confirmed in Reagan's last year. And, by the way, was brought up for a confirmation hearing by Joe Biden, who apparently has the Joe Biden rule, which doesn't exist, which McConnell and the Republicans are insisting on was his rule, that no nomination should happen during an election year or the final years of a presidency, depending on what mood they're in and how they want to describe this. So, well,
before you shoot off the president's remarks, I want to share with you a conversation I had with a very conservative, uneducated adult male this weekend who agreed with the philosophy that in the last year the president shouldn't be making any major decisions. And he went on and on and on about it, and he was quoting Rush Limbaugh and Glenn Beck and others. And so I asked him a simple question. All right, let me buy your premise for a moment. If this country were attacked, should the president do nothing?
Well, and
he looked at me.
And that's a very good point.
And he looked at me. I said, I'm just curious, because you said in the last year of presidential term he shouldn't make any major decisions. So are you saying that if we were attacked, the president shouldn't respond? Well, no, of course he should. I mean, that's his job. Oh,
right.
So it's his job to protect the country, but not his job to do, I don't know, his job.
Right. And what about a major disaster? If there was a major disaster, a flood, an earthquake,
Sorry,
a hurricane.
No. Sorry. I'm sorry. Mitch McConnell would say, nope, let him drown.
Yeah.
Let him drown. Not to mention what Mike Lee would say, right?
Oh, don't even get me started, please. We could do the entire hour on Mike Lee. Let's do an hour someday on Mike Lee and Louis Gohmert.
Oh, that would be fun. Well, golly.
Golly, I just don't think.
Wow. All right.
Okay.
Well, let's listen to what the president had to say about Judge Garland.
Here it is.
I chose a serious man and an exemplary judge, Merrick Garland. Over my 7 years as president, in all my conversations with senators from both parties, in which I asked their views on qualified Supreme Court nominees, and this includes the previous 2 seats that I had to fill, the one name that has come up repeatedly from Republicans and Democrats alike is Merrick Garland.
There we go. Merrick Garland. It's come up several times. We've talked about this guy.
Well, reason enough not to even give him a consideration. I want to go back to Judge Garland's remarks in the Rose Garden last week when he got emotional. This is not a man that is a sacrificial lamb. This is a man that believes that he is the right guy for the job. Now, Bernie Sanders has said that if he is elected president, he would rescind Judge Garland's nomination. Hillary Clinton has not weighed in on this. All the Republicans said, no freaking way would we ever put a guy like that forward. He's so left-leaning. Well, see, you and I actually do reading and homework. He's not left-leaning. There are some issues that he is more to the left, some that he's more to the right. It's kind of why they call him a moderate, isn't it?
Well, and I don't think that this is in the audio. It may very well be, but I found Mitch McConnell's statements particularly distressing when he basically said, "Why would the Republicans nominate someone who the NRA doesn't approve of?" And that has some really terrifying implications that really point to who the Republicans think are making decisions in this country, right? And who they're going to check with before they make these decisions. I mean, what McConnell basically said is that if the NRA doesn't like a Supreme Court justice, we're not going to let him get confirmed. And that to me is just kind of crazy. I mean, what he said too is something to the effect of when you have a nominee that MoveOn.org is enthusiastic about, and multiple articles pointing out if Merrick were confirmed, he would move the court dramatically to the left. I don't think that's a good idea. And then he went on to talk about how the NRA and business associations are against Merrick Garland. So who exactly are they representing here, right? That's really kind of the underlying, I mean, along with the obstruction that they're providing for us for obvious reasons, because they just, don't want Obama to get anything done at any point during his term. And we're going on 7 years now of really disgusting and over-the-top obstruction. But that statement alone, that, why should we even talk to someone that the NRA doesn't like? That to me is kind of terrifying.
Well, and let's be mindful that the next president will fill at least, I would think, 2 more terms. We have a handful of justices that are in their upper 70s, and I mean upper 70s, like 78.
Notorious
so
RGB.
This next election matters a great deal. But let's listen to what Mitch McConnell had to say. We've got 2 pieces of audio. We'll comment in between the 2 of them.
Okay.
Senator, thank you very much for joining me. Let's start with good morning, the fact that the Senate is in recess for 2 weeks now. Vulnerable Republicans are going to be bombarded with protests and attack ads for refusing to even give the president's Supreme Court pick a hearing. What if Democrats are right and this costs several Republicans in your caucus their seats and maybe even you the majority? Would it be worth it to keep a Democrat appointee off the Supreme Court?
Well, look, there's a lot of activity on this issue out in the country on both sides, and a lot of people who think this appointment ought to be made by the next president will be weighing in as well. And look, that's the principle. Who ought to make the decision? A lame duck president on the way out the door, or the president we're in the process of electing right now? What is the tradition? It's been 80 years, since a vacancy created in a presidential election year was filled. You have to go back to 1888, Grover Cleveland in the White House, to find the last time a vacancy created in a presidential year was filled by a Senate of a different party from the president. So we know what the tradition is, Dana. It's the Biden rule. When Joe Biden was chairman of the Judiciary Committee in '92, he said if a vacancy occurred, it would not be filled because of the pending election. Harry Reid said back in 2005 that even though the president nominates, that doesn't guarantee a vote. And Chuck Schumer, who's going to be the Democratic leader next year, said 18 months before the end of President Bush 43's term that if a vacancy occurred in the Supreme Court, they wouldn't fill it. So we know what the tradition is. This nomination ought to be made by the president we're in the process of electing this year.
And where in the Constitution does it say anything about traditions? Right.
Well, nowhere, number one. Number two, he doesn't quite have his facts right.
Correct. You are correct, sir.
Thank you. But he just doesn't quite have his facts right. And you know, listen, it's okay to stretch the truth. You know, it goes back to that line. Everybody has a right to their opinion. No one has a right to their own facts.
Right. Right, and I mean, and I got to tell you too, I'm a little surprised. I mean, they had the White House chief of staff on over the weekend on a couple of the shows, but I'm wondering, and Biden did release a press release about his explanation or recollection of the quote unquote Biden rule that doesn't exist. But I'm a little surprised that they're not making a bigger deal of this. And maybe it's not that big a deal. I mean, maybe my fear is always that you know, I have this theory that the Republicans rely on the stupidity of people and that the Democrats rely too much on the intelligence of people. So, you know, here we have another case of, well, you know, they'll figure it out themselves. They're smart people. And that's not always the case, you know. Speaking of which, I want to take a little sideline for just a sec. It was really interesting is over the weekend, Bernie Sanders made a comment about something that you and I talk about a lot. Is that historically Democrats win when the turnout is high, and the GOP wins when the turnout is low, right? And what that tells me about the country is something that you and I already know, is that the GOP and the GOP voters make up about a third of the voting population. And unless the Democrats really do what they need to do, and I think no matter who the Democratic nominee is and how the voters react to that nominee, Bernie Sanders has been instrumental in getting people to turn out and to show up and to start talking and paying attention. So, you know, that little comment just kind of confirmed what you and I have talked about for quite some time.
Absolutely. Well, Mitch McConnell continued his ill-directed comments on the SCOTUS nominee in this next piece of audio, which again we'll discuss after the fact. He makes it clear where, well, he stands anyway.
Yeah, and pay particular attention to what he says towards the end of the interview. So here we go.
If you want to discuss the nominee just for a minute, even though Barack Obama calls him a moderate, he's opposed by the NRA. He's opposed by the National Federation of Independent Business, which has never taken a position on a Supreme Court nominee before. The New York Times said it would move the court dramatically to the left. But this is not about this particular judge. This is about who should make the appointment. We're in the process of picking a president, and that new president ought to make this appointment, which will affect the Supreme Court maybe for the next quarter of a century.
Speaking of a new president, if Hillary Clinton or Bernie Sanders were to win the presidency, is there any chance that Republicans would vote to confirm Merrick Garland during a lame duck session of Congress?
I can't imagine that a Republican majority Congress in a lame duck session after the American people have spoken would want to confirm a nominee opposed by the NRA, the NFIB, and the New York Times says would move the court dramatically to the left.
Senator,
this nomination ought to be made by the next president.
So just to put a button on this, are you ruling it out 100%?
Yes.
That's a big statement.
Well, here's my question to you. He went out of his way to say that MoveOn.org is supporting him, which is not true. They're supporting a vote. I just want to make that clear. So why is it okay for him to bash MoveOn.org but promote the NRA and the NFIB?
Well, and what's interesting, too, is after I heard that statement about the New York Times and how the New York Times said that he would move it dramatically to the left, I found some articles in the New York Times about him, about them writing that he would move it to the left. Nothing about it being moved dramatically to the left. There's one article, actually that was by the Associated Press in the New York Times, where the headline is, Garland would move Supreme Court to left, comma, but how far, right? There's nothing, I didn't find anything about a statement saying that it would be moved dramatically to the left. Unless, Mitch McConnell, which he probably does, that any move to the left is dramatic. But there was no indication actually in the hour and a half to 2 hours of research that I dedicated to it that says that it would be moved dramatically to the left.
Well, and again, I did the same thing and didn't find the word dramatic anywhere. In fact, when you do a Google search, you'll get a lot of results, but none of them that match that phraseology. For what it's worth, which I think it's worth a lot. But, it's not just, the American people have spoken in poll after poll after poll, as low as 54%, as high as 73% in some polls, that the Senate should consider the SCOTUS nominee, whoever it happens to be. And then after Judge Garland was chosen, those numbers stayed as they were. And just for a moment, before we get into some of the other reaction from both the left and the right, Emily Sussman spoke about the Biden rule. And I think it's important, although it's a little long, I think it's important that we hear that.
Okay.
Emily Tish Sussman is campaign director for the Center for American Progress Action Fund, and Ashley Pratt is a senior political reporter for LifeSet. Welcome to you both. Good to have you here. So I just want to play a little bit of, this is Josh Earnest asked about the Biden rule yesterday on Special Report. Let's watch.
If we're talking about Biden's rules, I think what we do is the rules are essentially that if the president puts forward a nominee, that person gets a fair hearing and that person gets an up or down vote, whether or not Senator Biden supports them.
Ashley, what do you make of it?
Well, Biden put this precedent in place, right? And now all of a sudden Republicans are the ones who are evil here and holding off a nomination to the Supreme Court. And oh my gosh, it would be so terrible if there was an absence there. You know what? There's a campaign going on, and no one really wanted to be the sacrificial lamb offered up by President Obama. And Garland happened to be the one who's now involved in that, in this political game that the Democrats are now playing, saying, oh, he's a centrist figure. You know what? His position on gun rights is actually not very centrist at all. And that's something that Republicans will be fighting for. So let's wait and let the people decide come November who will be determining who the nominee is to the Supreme Court.
Emily, so the thinking is that Joe Biden set the precedent here and Republicans are merely going by that precedent.
What Biden did was made a comment when he was the chair of the Judiciary Committee. And actually, the comment he made right after that was saying that if you do bring forward a consensus moderate candidate, then we would absolutely give him a hearing and bring him in for a vote. That was actually the full comment that he made. And if we're going to talk about it as a rule, the rule that Biden moved forward with as chair of the Judiciary Committee was actually bringing forth and confirming justices. That's what he actually did when he was chair of the committee. He actually confirmed 17 justices in election years when he was chair of the committee. So I think that's actually the rule here.
Yeah. Ashley, that's the argument here. You know, how is it better for Republicans to not give this man a hearing who has been put forward? And I know that, you know, there are questions about his perspective on gun rights. Some people see him as a moderate, some don't. But why not give the man a hearing?
You know what? That's fine, but I think it's up to the American people, right? I think come November we will have made up our minds as to who we want in the White House.
But the American people nominated and elected the senators who are in place on the Judiciary Committee.
That's also true, Martha. I completely hear what you're saying, but I do think at the end of the day, the people that are in the Senate were put in there by the American people. The president will be put there by the American people, and it should be that nominee's decision to then nominate someone to the Supreme Court. I do not think that this should be something right now that the Senate is deciding in the middle of a very, very heated and contested election cycle that hasn't even determined who the nominee for each political party will be at this point. I do think we're at a very critical moment in our nation's history, and I do think that, you know, Obama's pick right now would definitely tilt more to the left than it would have been in the past decades.
It would also feed into the argument, Emily, would it not, that, you know, it gives Democrats an opportunity to say that Republicans are being obstructionist.
Yeah.
Well, I don't think it's an opportunity. I think it's actually real what's happening. I mean, how much dysfunction do we accept? How much do we think is enough? The president had nearly a year left in his term when he nominated Garland, or when Scalia died and then he nominated Garland. And the senators have nearly a year left in their term. So how much dysfunction do we agree is fine? We can say fine.
But Emily,
they just shut down. And he is a consensus nominee. He is nobody can say, and nobody has
he worked and volunteered for Clinton and Dukakis. How is that centrist? He has a history of working and volunteering for Democratic presidential candidates. How is that centrist at all? And his positions on gun rights, same thing. And when we're voting on critical things like abortion, gun rights,
come on.
Well, you know what?
No, I think that his argument, actually, his reputation as a justice is that he is very fair and provides very narrow opinions.
And I'm sure he'll be very
you guys are arguing. You're arguing about his philosophy, his political philosophy, and it appears that that's not even on the table. Because we spoke with Jim Inhofe, the senator earlier, who said it didn't matter if George Walker Bush was the nominee. They didn't want to hear from this person at all in any case because they feel like it shouldn't happen until after the election. So,
and that's what's fair.
Thanks a lot, you guys. Emily and Ashley, good to see you both.
Yeah, and that was on Fox News, actually, of all places. I mean, this is where I get he worked for Dukakis and for Clinton, and so he's a traitor now. I mean, we're no longer political parties. We're warring tribes, right? And it's like. It's like, when I was listening to that, I'm thinking about my dad, who's pretty much voted Republican all his life, and in 2008 actually voted for President Obama. And, so is he going to get his membership taken away? Is he no longer allowed to be part of the Republican Party because he did what he thought was right and used his vote to do what he thought was right? And, this kind of finger pointing and stuff, if you've ever worked on this, if you've ever given money to this, then, you're obviously not a true conservative, and, you shouldn't even be considered. I mean, this kind of stuff is just, you don't see the Democrats doing that, right? I mean, imagine if the roles were reversed and we were talking about Hillary Clinton right now, who at like 16 or 17 years old worked on the Goldwater campaign, right? She would be out of the running if we were the Republican Party right now, because she did such a horrendous, horrible, disgusting thing in her teens.
Well, George Will, the very conservative columnist, has written about the egregious nature of what the Republican-controlled Senate is doing, more than suggesting that the 10 seats that are in the balance for Republican senators may just hinge on this Supreme Court battle. Not to mention, speaking of Fox News, Greta Van Susteren last week had her mind or spoke her mind on this issue. And we're going to get to Michael Steele, who is the former chair of the Republican National Committee, in just a few moments. But let's first listen to Greta Van Susteren on Fox News last Thursday, talking about Republican obstructionism as it relates to the SCOTUS nominee.
Let's talk about the record. Tonight would be a great night to call it all quits to all the political games that hurt the American people. Let's start with the Supreme Court and with the president. Many of you have criticized President Obama for using executive power, saying he acts beyond his constitutional authority. Well, when it comes to the Supreme Court, the Constitution says the president shall nominate justices to the Supreme Court. Not may, but shall. And today he did, nominating federal Judge Merrick Garland. And while the Constitution does not require the Senate to hold a hearing on the nomination, the Senate should. And if the Senate Republicans don't like the president's choice, they could just vote no. But instead, Senate Republicans say they won't hold a hearing, so we citizens never hear from the nominee. That's a political game. And political games are petty. Democrats do the same thing, but political games hurt the American people and will go on until one side acts big and stops those games. This would be a good time to act big. Hold those hearings so that the next time something like this happens, we can look back at this moment in our history for guidance to do the right thing.
I find it absolutely fascinating that even commentators and pundits on Fox News and on the right and Republicans who comment on this are having an issue with how the Republicans are handling it. This to me is just, pure entertainment.
Sad entertainment, but entertainment nonetheless. Michael Steele, as I said, the former chairman of the Republican National Committee on MSNBC last week, also weighed in on the Senate Republicans, and this is what he had to say.
Michael Steele, what should the Republicans do?
They should welcome the president's nominee to Capitol Hill. They should have him visit with everybody and sit down and have a conversation and get to know him. And they should, at the appropriate time, cast a vote and vote him down if that's their choice, or vote him up. But I think the posture that you're not going to engage in this process at all, particularly if the president puts someone up that, as you just noted, Willie, that Republicans have supported in the past, 97-0, 98-0 in their vote. It's going to be a hard sell to the American people if they see this nominee who now they can attach a face to, not just a name. Right. They can read the bio. They can learn about this person. They grow to like him and think, yeah, not bad. How do you stand in the face of that? The Senate is in play not because of Donald Trump, folks. Right. The Senate is in play because of how we're approaching the SCOTUS nomination.
Excellent.
Well, I would go a step further and say the Senate is in play because of Mitch McConnell's constant obstructionism that dates back 7+ years, Z.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And the longer they continue to play these games, again, it's confusing and confounding to watch this. And I'm just going, well, I mean, what are they thinking? Do they think nobody's watching them? Do they think nobody cares? Do they think really that they have that much I can't even really think of a word right now, but how long can they deflect this and make it sound reasonable? Because it's starting to sound unreasonable even to hardcore Republicans at this point.
Well, and then you factor in, and this will be my bridge to the next topic, you factor in what's happening now with Donald Trump and the establishment Republicans, which Mitch McConnell is very much a part of. And before we get to McConnell's thoughts on Donald Trump, and there are two very good pieces of audio that you grabbed from yesterday, the current chair of the Republican National Committee, Reince Priebus, was asked by Dana Bash yesterday about the convention, which is becoming cloudier as the moments go on. And if Donald Trump doesn't reach that magic 1,200 and I believe it's 67 delegates, the establishment in the Republican Party, which, by the way, now has a 100-day game plan to dethrone Donald Trump, and good luck with that, gets more and more interesting. But here's Reince Priebus talking to Dana Bash from CNN about the convention. And as you point out earlier, paying attention to Mitch McConnell, really pay attention to the nuances. We have three separate pieces of audio, and we'll comment in between them. But pay attention to the nuances in what Reince Priebus has to say.
Okay, let's turn to the matter of you not having a nominee in sight. Donald Trump told CNN this week that if he is 20 or 100 delegates short of the magic number of 1237, he should still get the nomination. Does that sound fair to you?
Well, there's two things. Number one, I mean, history would show, whether it be like Walter Mondale, Gerald Ford, when someone's a little bit short, you let the process play out, and generally, if it's that close, generally that's what happens. But certainly what I would say is that the minority of delegates doesn't rule for the majority. So this is a delegate-driven process. This is the first time in a long time people actually cared about delegate count. But delegates matter. And so the majority of voting delegates in our party choose the nominee. That's the way it is, Dana.
So did that explain anything to you?
Of course not, because that is the beauty of Reince Priebus, although when pushed, as we'll listen in our second audio, and not to mention the third piece of audio, well, he makes it even more interesting, not by what he says, but what he doesn't say, Z.
Yeah, and what I locked into on that last bit of audio was we let the system play out, right? And it's kind of hard to determine whether or not he actually means that, or he's saying it because he sounds good, or what system he's referring to, their system or the system. So let's play the second. Let's play the second piece, and maybe we can figure something else out.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that, because one of your committeemen, Curly Helgeland, said this week that it is the party, not the voters, choosing the nominee. Do you agree with that as chairman?
No, I think it's a combination of the two. I mean, the voters create the bound delegates. So if you're voting in a state, when candidates receive a certain amount of votes, they bind the delegates to that candidate. Look, 150 years ago, this is what it used to be. People would run for delegates in their states. They would win these elections, and they would go to the floor of a convention, and they'd vote for who they wanted. And that's how we picked a nominee. Same thing Kiwanis would do. Same thing the NRA would do. Somewhere along the line, Dana, people decided that they would expand the participation, and they said, we'll have these primaries and caucuses, but then we'd bind the hands of the delegates for just one vote based on that outcome. And then it expanded into other things. So the voters are certainly empowered, but the delegates vote based on the outcome of those elections.
And again, nothing is really explained. I mean, what I find interesting in this entire discussion, particularly on the part of the GOP, is it used to be like this 150 years ago, and then what we're doing now and how that's changed and where we are today and what the rules were, and here are the rules that we have today that can change at the drop of a hat and can change even a week before the election, and that it's a combination of everything because, I made about as much sense as Reince Priebus in that.
Well, and I did a little research this weekend on what bound delegates are. And for those that aren't aware, those are delegates that are committed to a candidate based on primaries, not on caucuses, but on primaries. And so the only free agents at this point are delegates that were committed to Rubio, Ben Carson, etc., which are, of course, a small minority of the delegates chosen to this point. The interesting thing about the rules, and I think Reince Priebus may be talking about this in the next piece of audio, is that on the first ballot, if there aren't enough delegates committed, the majority of delegates are not committed to the top vote getter, after the first ballot, delegates are free agents and they can vote for whoever they want. But let's listen to the last piece of audio from the Republican National Committee Chair Reince Priebus.
Let's, because of all of the interest in your rules, there's a lot of knowledge now about Rule 40 of the RNC. It's something that was adopted in 2012.
There's a lot of misinformation.
Good. So let's clear it up.
Okay.
It was adopted in 2012. It says a candidate must have the support of a majority of delegates from 8 different states. So has to win 8 states in order to win the nomination. Are you committed to keeping that rule in place?
First of all, it's not exactly right. What the rule says is that in order to be nominated on the floor, you have to have the majority of delegates from 8 states. And by the way, that was put in 2012 for the 2012 convention.
Right.
The Rules Committee for the 2016 convention will decide what that rule is. So now, and there's nothing mysterious about that. I tend to be a person who likes to keep things the way they are. But it's not my decision, though, Dana. I'm not the person that gets to decide. The delegates that get elected in each of these states make the decisions for what the rules for the 26th convention will say. And I'm not saying anything nefarious. This is just the way it is.
Right.
So you could be voting at the boys. Go ahead.
No question about that. But you understand politics. And then there are rules, and then there is perception. And given the environment out there right now, do you think it's a bit dangerous to change the rules, even if it's okay, even if it's sort of legal within the party boundaries? It certainly will look potentially like things are being rigged one way or another if and when the ruls are changed, given the environment.
There are always risks to every decision that you make, but there will always be a perception problem if people continue to not explain the process properly. So the 2012 Rules Committee writes the rules for the 2012 convention. The 2016 Rules Committee writes the rules for the 2016 convention. Are you trying to say that the Rules Committee that was made up of Romney delegates should enforce the rules for the 26th convention, which will largely be made up of Trump Cruz delegates? I mean, that wouldn't make any sense, would it? I mean, that's what I don't understand. This is very simple. The delegates get elected. The delegates fill the slots on these different committees, and there's many committees. There's platform, rules, credentials. Those delegates make the decisions on the governance of the convention that they're a part of. That's really simple to me.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate it. Sounds simple to you, but it's going to be something you're going to have to explain over and over. I appreciate it.
And over and over and over and over and over.
Well,
Go ahead.
I had a thought about this, and then I want to I'd like to hear what you have to say. But here's in 2000. Now he said that in 2012, the rules were that you had to have a majority of delegates in 8 states. Prior to that, at least according to an article in Forbes, you had to have a plurality of delegates from each of 5 or more states. So in 2012, they changed it from 5 to 8. So what this is starting to look like is that you have rules, but for the convention, but you have rules for a very particular convention. So I think what people need to understand is that these aren't hard and fast rules by which the GOP has their conventions year after year. They change the rules as it suits them. And this is what it kind of reminded me of. So, but a lot of our audience probably doesn't know. I was born in France. I spent some time in Switzerland in the 80s. And I used to play this game called pétanque, which is it's a French version of bocce ball, right? And you have these pits that you play in that are, 12 to 15 feet long, and sometimes they're surrounded by wooden borders, and other times they're not, but there's definitely a border. And in the rules of this game, if the ball that you throw hits an outside wall, it goes out of play because you're not allowed to bounce your balls off of the outside walls. Now, my mother...
And who would?
Right. My mother, who is French, had built this pit. She and I built this pit in the backyard to be able to play this game. And she was constantly bouncing her ball off of the back wall. And I told her that's against the rules. And I showed her the rules as the commission for this game plays it, because it's a very big and popular game in Europe. And she brought out another list of rules that said that you can bounce your balls off of the back wall. And Tony, the rules that she gave me were written by her in her handwriting. And her reasoning was it's her pit, and whatever rules she wants to have is what the ones we're going to play by. Not the ones that the rest of the world plays by, but by her rules. And this is, to me...
Go ahead.
This is, to me, exactly what the GOP is doing with their convention. Right? So that
brings me... Go ahead.
It even gets to the point of you need a majority of delegates being, 1,235 or whatever the hell the number is, to where if Donald Trump has 1,236, they could turn around and say... right before the convention, no, I'm sorry, it's 1,250, according to this year's rules.
No, that wouldn't be applicable, but I understand the point that you're making. But it's a nice segue into a conversation that Rachel Maddow had with a gentleman by the name of Doug Weed. For those that don't know who Doug Weed is, Doug Weed was responsible for Ron Paul's delegates at the 2012 election. So pay attention to where this conversation is headed, because there's always a backdoor in the GOP world.
Fat men who will sit in a room, I say that joking, but I know all of them and they are overweight. 10 fat men will sit in a room and they'll pick who the delegates are. So what you're doing to your party is you're emasculating your party. You are destroying the infrastructure of your party. There's no sense of ownership. What you want to give people to win is a sense of ownership. So they want to go to a precinct caucus. They want to be part of it because they own it. They get to become voted a delegate to go to the district convention. And at the district convention, you want those people empowered, because to win the election, you're going to need people working at the state level like an army.
If that's a guy who sounds like he knows what he's talking about, it's because that guy knows what he's talking about. That's Doug Weed. He was a former senior advisor to the Ron Paul presidential campaign. He worked on Mr. Paul's 2012 campaign when it was so remarkably successful at amassing way more delegates than anybody expected, only for to a certain extent, only for the RNC to basically change the rules on the convention floor and basically disenfranchise those folks that they'd worked so hard to get to the convention. It is a strange sidebar story to 2012. It is a story that has been basically written out of official Republican history, even though it only happened 4 years ago. It's starting to feel, though, like it might be really, really important for understanding what the party's about to go through now. Joining us now, I'm very happy to say, is Mr. Doug Weed. Doug, it's great to see you again. Thank you so much for being here tonight.
Good to see you, too. You're a brilliant lady, Rachel. I've been watching this.
Well, that's nice of you to say.
You figured it out.
Well, what did you guys know at the Ron Paul campaign in 2012 that the rest of the campaigns didn't? You obviously were onto something that blindsided everybody else.
Yeah, we knew that the back door was open. You see, the FBI wanting Apple to come up with a back door so they can go through the encryption and get those messages. We saw that the party left the back door open, and there are these delegates and tote boards that go up at the New York Times and on MSNBC, but those are delegates in theory based on the rules of the GOP party in the given state. But the actual delegates are human beings like you and me. And they may not like Trump or Cruz or Rubio, and they may, but they're individuals. And those are the people that need to be recruited and placed by the campaigns.
It sounds like you feel like the conversations about how this might go this year with all this excitement about a possible open convention, it sounds like you feel like at least the media discussion, maybe the political pros talking about this, generally don't know what they're talking about. They're kind of speaking from a position of either naivete or maybe ignorance in terms of what this is really going to be like.
That's very true. And it's fascinating, the story you just showed your viewers. The establishment Republicans are reverse engineering it. They know how close they came to falling prey to our insurgency campaign last time. And so now they see Trump running away with it, and they say, wait a second. This guy, he's forever changed presidential campaigning. He's brilliant at branding. He knows how to plan an event. But he, too, has left the back door open just like we did 4 years ago. And this time, those delegates are ours. They're basically Mitt Romney delegates that were recruited 4 years ago, and they're in place to re-coronate President incumbent Mitt Romney.
Go ahead, Tony.
I'm sorry, I didn't turn my mic off during the audio. The incompetent Mitt Romney. Well, I mean, obviously Doug Weed has a bias, but that's about personalities, but it's not about the process. And, you know, I don't buy that Trump doesn't have a ground game. I don't know why people keep saying that. I think it's part of an ongoing dialogue and Doug Weed did not say that Donald Trump did not have a ground game. He said he needed one. He didn't say he didn't have one. But if you listen to the quote-unquote establishment politicians, they say he doesn't have a ground game. They say he's not organized. I'm sorry, Z, unless I'm not following this properly, hasn't he won the majority of the primaries?
Yeah, and I would argue that Twitter and Facebook are now part of the ground game. You know,
absolutely.
So, you know,
and have been actually since Howard Dean.
Yeah, well, and you know, maybe they're looking at as a conventional knocking on doors, having offices in different cities ground game, but that's no longer really necessary. But what's interesting is what they're talking about is prior to 2012, you needed five or more states. And Ron Paul had easily, at the time, accomplished at least a plurality of delegates from 4 states: Iowa, Maine, Minnesota, and Louisiana, and also appeared to have, at the time, delegates from Nevada, Iowa, and Washington, Colorado, and Missouri that were ready to vote for him at the convention and give him that quote-unquote plurality. So it seemed at the time that under Rule 40, Ron Paul would have gotten over that threshold And Romney and his supporters, basically the GOP, were unhappy about that. And rather than requiring that a candidate only have a plurality of delegates from 5 states to be nominated, the rule was changed shortly before the convention to require that a candidate have a majority of delegate votes in at least 8 states as a prerequisite for nomination. So they change these rules as it suits their outcome, is basically what we're getting at here. And what Reince Priebus said during that interview earlier, that, all of a sudden people are interested in delegates. Well, yeah. And it's not good news for the GOP that people are becoming interested in these rules, because they can change at the drop of a hat. And this is the problem that we're seeing.
Well, again, it's astounding and really confusing, but it's worth the time and effort that it takes to follow along, as you and I are doing. Our friend, before we get there, the entire weekend was still about Donald Trump and how to derail him. And I'm telling you, after tomorrow, we'll just see how well Donald Trump does. I don't expect him to do well in Utah. Nobody does. And Ted Cruz can have Utah. I'm just going to leave that comment where it's at. But with that said, our friend Amy Goodman from Democracy Now!, who I've interviewed many times, who I enjoy reading a great deal, had an earful on Donald Trump. And this is what she had to say very quickly before we have to wrap things up.
Amy, let me ask you first. We've heard people on this show before in the summer and the fall say, actually, Trump should have gotten more coverage early in his campaign because he is such a dominant force. What do you say to that?
I mean, I just say, look at what is happening today. Let's look at Super Tuesday 3. You had major coverage here at CNN, at MSNBC, at Fox, all the networks, of course, all through the night as the polls are closing. You see the concession speeches and the great victory speeches. You see Hillary Clinton, Ted Cruz, Kasich. You see Donald Trump. You're waiting here at CNN, MSNBC. They said he's going to hold a news conference. Of course, it didn't end up being one.
Right.
And that's it. Where was Bernie Sanders? Well, in fact, Bernie Sanders was in Phoenix, Arizona before thousands of people. And as the networks were waiting for Donald Trump and all the pundits are weighing in, they don't even say that Bernie Sanders is about to speak. This was the moment
because he was the biggest loser of the night?
No, because they did not know that at the point. At that point, it looked like he could take Illinois and Missouri, and CNN was very good at stressing this. They said they didn't know. Hillary Clinton came in early, afraid maybe that she might lose her own state, Illinois. So everyone was waiting. This is when Wolf Blitzer, when Anderson Cooper was saying, we don't know. And he gives a speech, but they don't only, a few weeks ago it was holding on to Hillary Clinton's speech for an hour news conference of Donald Trump as he sold his steaks and his magazines and his water and everything else he had on the stand. This time, they didn't even record and show afterwards Bernie Sanders. He was completely absent.
But to play devil's advocate with you, hasn't Clinton essentially clinched the nomination?
But
She's very likely to be the nominee, and perhaps that's been the undercovered story.
What about John Kasich? I mean, he won one state that night at altogether, but every single, that was the night Rubio pulled out. But at that point, they didn't know what would happen. Would it be a 3-2 split? So you just ice out this candidate? But it's not only the networks. The Washington Post, March 6th to 7th, they have 16 articles in a 24-hour period against Bernie Sanders. And the recent New York Times story, the New York Times, a positive story recently about Bernie Sanders, record.
Candidates should get tough coverage, the coverage.
No. There was a positive story. They did a positive story, and in a very stealth way, it was edited ultimately to be a negative story. The public editor wrote a column about it and everything. I think it's very important to understand the media manufactures consent. And in this case, they're this is as Noam Chomsky says, manufacturer's consent. We right now, this is the anniversary of the Iraq War.
Right, the 13th anniversary.
Right, it's the 13th
What is the consent
anniversary
that's being manufactured?
I think this exposure for Trump is very frightening. Yes, there is now some critical coverage, but for the year 2015, as the snowball rolled and it got larger and larger, he got 23 times the coverage of Bernie Sanders.
And that's just the way it is. That's just the way it is. So it's just the reality. Listen, as Carly Fiorina's former campaign manager said on the air with Alex Witt this weekend, the media is partially responsible for creating Donald Trump. To this day, all he has to do is pass gas, and the media is all over it. They'll interrupt anybody's news to report on what he's doing. You and I have discussed this how many different occasions, and it just gets more sickening and more sickening. And we're unfortunately, we're out of time, but go ahead and comment on Amy Goodman, and we'll wrap things up.
I will, and then I'll give our information out. Over the weekend there was an event that Bernie Sanders was giving. There was a stadium that held 20,000 people, and it filled over capacity. And I didn't see anything in the news about the tens of thousands, nearly 30,000 people that showed up in Seattle to hear this. So that said, I do want to make a particular plug for our ratings and reviews on iTunes. This is becoming increasingly important, even if you don't listen to us through iTunes. iTunes has the corner of the market on promoting people, and the more reviews and downloads and ratings we get, the higher they push us up so that more people can see us and listen to us. And the more people that can hear us and listen to us, the longer we can stay on the air doing this so that you can listen to us. So if you go to our website at www.tnztalk.com, you'll find all the information for that on the support page of how to rate us and review us in iTunes, and anything else you need to know about us as far as our social media accounts, how to follow us, how to friend us, and, of course, how to support us, and both of our bios and everything you need to know about the show and us, and We're Afraid to Ask. Tony?
All right. Yep, that cleans it up for us on this Monday. Tomorrow we'll preview the primaries. Obviously, a lot to get to, including the ongoing trip by President Obama to Cuba. We'll air some of his remarks as he met with Raul Castro today. We are just out of time, folks. Thank you, as always, for being with us. Heed what Zombek just said and do the right thing. In the meantime, Z, have a great day. Folks, to all of you and everybody at Blog Talk Radio, including Rihanna and Ron, we appreciate everything you do for us. And as always, we ask that you be well.
Oh, yeah. Can you feel it? Just over the credits, just riffing now. Words and chords. Not the poetry and the real thing, but not bad for an ad-lib. Not good, but... And it's not long enough, so just do a little bit more. And that's nearly done. That's the final credit there. That's the end.